For years, journalists in Iran have faced arrest, intimidation, even death for simply doing their jobs. Now, a new study from the University of Toronto is examining the psychological effects around that. Joining us now with more, Maziar Bahari, journalist, filmmaker, and author of Then They Came for Me, a book about his time as a political prisoner in Iran's notorious Evin prison. And we're very happy to welcome you here to TVO.
Very nice to be back.
We should remind everybody, you get this all the time, but in case your name sounds familiar, you're the guy Jon Stewart did the movie Rosewater about.
Yes, he did. Yes, yeah. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah.
Well, I don't think you needed reminding, but our viewers might have. Yeah. Let's talk about the situation in Iran and what it's like for working journalists there. What are the biggest challenges they're dealing with right now?
We cannot say what is the government is the biggest challenge, so we cannot single out one challenge. The challenge is that they have to work under constant threat of censorship, harassment of themselves, of their families, shutting down their media outlets, imprisonment, torture, and sometimes death. So they have to go through that every day. They do not know what happens in the next hour, the next day. They can go to work one day, they can end up in jail. And no one is accountable. In Iran, when you talk to the government of President Rohani, they say that it's not us, it is either the Revolutionary Guards or intelligence officials or the judiciary. And when you talk to the judiciary, they say it's not us. They did something criminal and the government has to deal with them. So no one is really accountable for what is happening to journalists.
When they try to intimidate a journalist, is it a knock on the door in your home in the middle of the night, or how does it happen?
It can happen in a variety of ways. I started working as a professional journalist in Iran in 1997 until I was arrested and imprisoned in 2009. So for 12 years, I had to deal with intelligence officials on a monthly basis. And I'm not exaggerating. Sometimes it was more than once a month. Actually, I remember I wrote an article about being interrogated 3 times in 4 days. And it was very cordial in a sense. They would take me to a hotel room, they would feed me tea and coffee, sweets, and then they would just tell me that, why did you write this? Why did you have that line in your article?
How many people in the room?
2 people usually.
2 people? And you're seated?
I'm seated. It was very comfortable. There was nothing seemingly menacing, but it was menacing, of course, because these people are responsible for death, torture, and imprisonment of many people.
So you felt intimidated.
So you feel intimidated, and I had to deal with that on a monthly basis. So I was working for foreign media in Iran. Iranian journalists, they're not treated as nicely. They can be beaten, they can be taken in, they can be beaten, and sometimes tragedies happen. A few years ago, a blogger wrote a very mild blog criticizing the Iranian government. They took him in, they beat the poor man, and he died in prison, and no one has been punished because of his death. This is the situation they have to go through every day.
Do journalists, this is an odd question, but do journalists arm themselves?
In what sense?
Do they carry guns to protect themselves?
Iran is not like the United States. It's very difficult to find guns in Iran, and it's illegal for people to carry guns. So they cannot, even they cannot have, pepper spray or anything like that. So no, they cannot. And also you're dealing with a government that's armed, and even if you have a revolver or some sort of gun, you cannot do anything.
It's not going to help. Since you were last here, Iran got a new president, Hassan Rohani. Yes. I guess there were hopes that things would be better under him. Is it any better?
It is symbolically better. The good thing is that Ahmadinejad is not in power anymore. So there is a little bit more space for people to express themselves, to share information. But we have to understand that the system of governance in Iran is like an absolute monarchy, and the president of Iran is like a prime minister in an absolute monarchy. So the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, the successor to Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the founder of the revolution, he is like the absolute monarch. And like an absolute monarchy, they want to justify their rule. They want to have some sort of legitimacy. So every now and then, there is an election. And during that election, people can sometimes have the best of the bad choices that are presented to them, like they had in 2013.
Well, he has to green light all the candidates, right?
Yes, of course. The council that assigned by the supreme leader of Iran has to green light all the candidates. They have to go through that filter.
Not anybody can run.
Not everyone can run, of course, yes. But symbolically, it was a positive step because it showed that when people came to the streets in 2009 asking, where is my vote, and made the government somehow uncomfortable, it resulted in some sort of change in 2013, and the Revolutionary Guards and the Supreme Leader allowed people to elect Ayatollah Khamenei's unlikeliest candidate, because he was the least liked candidate among all the candidates that were available in 2013.
Okay, let's circle back to the introduction and talk about this study that your organization, Journalism is Not a Crime, commissioned. Why did you feel that doing a study, A, was necessary and B, would be helpful?
There were two reasons for that. I did a documentary film in 2005 with Dr. Anthony Feinstein, who conducted this study. I was working in Iraq at that time, and I was working with war journalists, and Anthony did a study of war journalists and PTSD and other psychological problems amongst war journalists. And while we were doing that study, because I was going back and forth to Iran as well, I realized that what many war journalists are going through, maybe for 2 weeks or 1 month, happens to Iranian journalists on a daily basis. So I thought it would be really interesting to do a study in Iran as well. Of course, I was going back and forth to Iran. I did not have the opportunity to carry out that study during that time. But when I went to prison in 2009, I came out 118 days later, and I was supported by Newsweek, the magazine I was working for at that time. I was afforded psychological help, legal help, medical help, and I knew that many of my friends do not have that, are not as lucky as I am, do not have the opportunity. I thought we should do that study, do the PTSD study among Iranians, find out what are the problems, how can we help them, and at the same time, make the Iranian government accountable for its actions. Because up to now, up to the time that this study is released, we've had anecdotal studies of what is happening to journalists in Iranian prisons. People like me came out of Iran, talked about what happened to us. It was dramatic and it affected some people, but it was not scientific. Here, we have a scientist doing a scientific study through scientific methodology in black and white, showing that the Iranian government is brutalizing some of its own citizens, journalists, and they are suffering from these psychological problems. And something has to be done about them.
I've got some of the numbers here. Let's share the numbers. You know them. We'll share them with our viewers here.
Sure.
78% of the journalists surveyed had to stop working on a story because of threats or assaults. 78%. More than 60% said they were under state surveillance. More than 60% said they had been intimidated. These are some of the main findings. What else did you find out, Maziar?
20% of the journalists we talked to said that they were tortured. More than 50% of them said that their families were intimidated. These are shocking results, and it was shocking. They were shocking results for Dr. Feinstein. And he's a man who's worked with war journalists, he's worked in Mexico, he's worked in Kenya, and when he saw the results, he was shocked. He said, I can't believe that how many people were tortured in Iran, how many people are suffering from PTSD symptoms.
Now, you had a good sense, obviously, having been through it, about what these numbers would unfold.
Sure.
Did you find anything out you didn't expect?
I did not know that the Iranian government intimidate families to that degree. I knew about it, but I did not know to that degree. But also, it was something that I always heard about it. I did not have a scientific study done about this.
Give me an example. How would they intimidate families?
They call them as soon as a journalist is in prison. They call the family and they say that don't talk to the media, otherwise his or her situation is going to get worse. If that person talks to the media, they take the parent or brother or sister of the journalist in, intimidate them inside a police station or prison. And also there can be different calls, there can be messages to them, there can be a stranger hanging around in front of their houses. There are different methods. One thing that we have to understand about the Iranian government is that they really know how to intimidate people. These are many of the people who are in charge of the government in Iran now. They are the people, they were tortured before the revolution, before 1979 revolution.
By Savak.
They were in Shah's prisons. They were tortured by Shah's intelligence agency, Savak, with the help of the Americans and Israelis, of course. And they learned about torture. They understood what are the most vulnerabilities, how can you use the vulnerabilities of people, and what torture can be most effective. So when they came to power, instead of learning a good lesson that no, we should not torture people, they learned how to torture people. And according to one of the intelligence officials I spoke with about 10 years ago, physical torture is not as effective as psychological torture, because with physical torture, there is a threshold of tolerance. And after you pass that threshold, sometimes the prisoner gets into a nirvana state and thinks that he or she is invincible and resists. But with psychological torture, there is no threshold. You can torture the person as much as you want. And as we have talked to some of the Iranian journalists, some of them were threatened to be raped. A woman was threatened to be raped by common criminals who have not seen a woman for years. She was threatened to be raped in front of her husband. A pregnant woman was put in a cell with one toilet in a communal cell for one toilet for 3 people, so they had to go to the toilet in front of each other. These are the type of treatments that so it is not only the beatings or pulling the nails that constitute torture, it is the psychological torture that the Iranian journalists are suffering, not only in prison, but also in their offices, while they are working in their offices.
I know you've told these stories before, and forgive me for going over them again, but I do want people to get a sense of how damaged you as a person were after 118 days in prison in Iran.
Well, I was somehow damaged, but I was very lucky that I had a family outside of Iran. I managed to come out of Iran. I managed to write an article for Newsweek magazine, 10,000 words. I wrote a book, then I worked on a film. I managed to talk to people like you, to different media outlets. So even though I was somehow depressed, I had avoidant behavior, one of the signs of PTSD, although Anthony Feinstein, who conducted this study, said that I met him 3 months after I came out. He said that I didn't have PTSD, but I had some symptoms that were similar to symptoms of PTSD. But I was very lucky to have a foreign, well-financed employer like Newsweek magazine at that time.
What could they do for you?
They provided a therapist for me. I went to see 2 or 3 therapists as soon as I came out.
Did you need that?
I needed it, yes. I needed to talk to someone. I needed a professional to ask me the right question, to tell me the right ways to deal with my problem. I had medical help. I even had legal help, and I sued the Iranian television channel that aired my forced confession. Most of my colleagues, most of my Iranian colleagues, when they come out of prison, they go to a bigger prison, which is called Iran as the country. So they go out from a smaller prison to a bigger prison, and they are still under constant threat by the intelligence forces. And sometimes they migrate, they go to another country, but they don't speak the language. They do not have their families around them. They do not have the support group that they have in Iran. So one of the results of the study is that PTSD is seen more among the Iranian journalists in the diaspora than Iranians inside Iran.
It's been 6 years since that experience for you. Forgive the expression here, but are you back to normal now? Do you feel normal again?
Well, I was never normal. But
Whatever
I don't
that-
know. I mean,
define
we're
it however you
journalists. I mean,
want.
how can you
Yeah.
call a journalist normal person? We should ask our wives about that, yeah. But I think I'm somehow back to normal because I'm very lucky that I can sublimate whatever psychological problems that I've had into projects like this. I can talk about this, I can do something positive.
It's an outlet for you.
So it's an outlet for me. But of course, I have nightmares, I have flashbacks, I get angry every now and then, I get really edgy at times. But I'm very lucky that I'm working and I have the opportunity to sublimate my anger, my negative emotions into something positive. Most of my colleagues do not have that, and they need help.
What responsibility do you think, I mean, the Western countries of this world are really under the microscope right now, whether it's the Syrian crisis or whatever.
Sure.
What role do you think they have to play in helping those that are unfairly prisoned? Mohammed Fahmy, I mean, best example right now, probably in the entire world. What do we do?
We are going through a really volatile and dangerous period in journalism as a business. On one hand, more people have access to information. Not only that, but also they have more access to ways to share the information, disseminate information on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Vimeo, you name it. And on the other hand, you have these governments, like the Iranian government or the Egyptian government, that are facing a new phenomenon. They do not know what to do with it. So they have to make up as they go. For example, my interrogator told me that you are a media spy. Towards the end of my imprisonment. And I said, what is a media spy? He said, that's the beauty of it. We have to define it together. And I asked him, so you mean I'm here on a charge that I have to help you define it? How ridiculous is that? That same thing was articulated by the Egyptian judge when they sentenced Mohammed Fahmy and two others. They said that Al Jazeera as a channel seemed to support Muslim Brotherhood. And vicariously, people who work for Al Jazeera are working for Muslim Brotherhood, which is a banned group in Egypt. So we are sentencing these people to 3 years. Where that logic comes from?
Catch-22.
It is just that these people don't know what to do with it. And it's not only in Iran or Egypt, Middle Eastern countries. The same situation is in China, Russia, many other countries.
Let's finish off on this. How hopeful are you that what you're engaged in right now can actually do something concrete here?
Well, what we are trying to do on Journalism is Not a Crime, journalismisnotacrime.com, is to give a name to numbers. Because when we say that 50 journalists are arrested, these are not only numbers. These people are mothers, fathers, husbands, wives, brothers, sisters. They are human beings. So we try to give a name to these numbers, put a face on the names, give a biography of these people so people can somehow relate to them. And at the same time, we're trying to provide them with some psychological help. We have some therapists working with us, with some legal help, and try to do as much as we can. But as I said, we are going through a very volatile and dangerous period in journalism, not only in Iran, but all around the world.
Indeed. Good luck with your work.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for coming in and telling us about it tonight here on TVO.
Thank you.
Maziar Bahari, journalist, filmmaker. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.